Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, so the saying goes, meaning that if someone is copying you, then you must have done something special enough to be copied. In a way, it's a compliment, even if the second half of the saying does disparage the one doing the copying. And the thing is, in some industries, copying is unavoidable. In writing, music, and gaming, everyone borrows and copies and imitates each other. Someone does something great, and then others flock to copy that idea, but with their own spin on it. Originally, first-person shooters were called Doom clones. In the last few years, we've seen the emergence of the Souls-like and Souls-born genre of gaming. And for a time, in 2017, a new genre of games had begun to crop up: the Breath of the Wild clone. The thing is, just because it's a clone doesn't mean it can't have some ideas of its own, such as the interesting case of Immortal Fenyx Rising, which took the open-world, free-form, exploration-based gameplay loop of Breath of the Wild and mixed it with another semi-popular concept at the time, adding in real-world classical mythology to your video games. In this case, making a game centered around the Greek pantheon and their mythology. Now, without a question, the most famous game to do this is the original God of War franchise, which first hit consoles all the way back in 2005, and didn't stop killing until 2010, until basically the entire Greek pantheon lay dead at the player and Kratos' feet. But unlike God of War, Immortal Fenyx Rising would take a different approach, and instead would be about rebuilding the pantheon after they had fallen from grace. Not by the hands of a man with truly breathtakingly deep amounts of rage, but instead by one of their oldest and greatest foes, the last son of Gaia and the all-powerful Titan, Typhon. Add in a framing device that sees the player's actions being narrated by a captive Prometheus to a disinterested and passively aggressive Zeus, and I found myself intrigued when I first heard about this game. Now, full disclosure, I never played Breath of the Wilds in the first place. I didn't have a Switch until about 6 months ago, and if I'm honest, I've already played the greatest Zelda game ever made, Ocarina of Time, back on the N64. But I remember seeing the trailers for Fenyx Immortal Rising and being interested in it. Something about its cartoony style mixed with its unique narrative framing device and an admittedly personal interest in the Greek gods and goddesses appealed to me. So let's explore this game together, its ups and its downs, its strengths and its weaknesses, and all the DLC that came with it. Please keep in mind that I am by no means an expert on the subjects covered in this video, and if you have ideas that differ from mine, that is okay. Starting off with a cutscene, the game immediately introduces us to the main villain, the all-powerful Titan, Typhon, who speaks to the player about the gods even as he holds one of them in his claws. This one killed 6 innocent children to justify her rage, he tells you, making it clear that not only does he have no love for the gods, but that the player should not either. We then cut to a man half frozen, chained to a mountainside, alone. Those who know Greek mythology probably already know who this man is, before the game even tells you his name. For everyone else, we get our confirmation when the man calls out, bellowing Zeus's name only for the king of the gods to appear and greet him as Prometheus. For those of you who don't know Greek mythology, Prometheus is a titan/god who defied Zeus and stole fire from Olympus and gave it to us mortals, giving us knowledge, technology, and civilization. As punishment, Zeus decreed that Prometheus was to be chained to a rock and have his liver pecked out by an eagle before growing back every single day until the end of time. Zeus greets Prometheus with the kindness of a man who wants something, and sure enough, Zeus reveals that Typhon has indeed broken free and is ravaging the lands, and has already slain several gods. Prometheus begrudgingly admits that Typhon is blocking his ability to see the future and that he cannot help. A fact that angers Zeus, but also makes him reveal that Typhon has stolen Zeus's lightning, rendering him without his greatest weapon. Prometheus then says there is another way, but it will take a mortal to do it. A fact that disgusts Zeus, who has a pretty low opinion of mortals and mankind as of late. In the end, the two come to an agreement and a bet of sorts. If Prometheus is right and a mortal can indeed help them, then Zeus will undo the punishment of Prometheus and concede that mortals are not all useless. But if Zeus is right and the mortal cannot help, then Prometheus will help defeat Typhon and then go right back to his rock and eagle liver-eating routine. And so the story of our character begins, being either the sister or brother of a great hero returning from battle, but being caught up in a storm that is so great it washes the player characters to the Golden Isles. and thus begins character creation, which is pretty modest overall, but I do find enjoyable. I had a good chuckle when I figured out that I could play as a female but still give them male facial hair, and it was enjoyable to hear Zeus and Prometheus describing the various features of the character I was making. In the end, I decided to play a female character since the majority of heroes in Greek mythology were men, and I figured it would be a fun twist. Plus, with Zeus's history of philandering and womanizing, I thought it might be fun to play as a female character who would definitely tell him to fuck off if he ever tried to hit on her. The first few minutes of the game are your basic tutorials. We wake up, look around, climb a cliff, try to get our bearings, and we find that everyone from the ship has been turned to stone. While narration from Prometheus teaches us that up until now, our character has basically been living in the shadow of her older brother, who is a true and proper war hero. Unfortunately for him and us, he's been turned to stone too. His sword, on the other hand, is free for the taking, which triggers combat tutorials. I'll go into more detail in another section about combat in this game, but it feels pretty good. You have a basic attack with your sword, and later you'll gain a bow for ranged combat and an axe for heavy and crowd control attacks, plus a few magical abilities that have some combat uses as well as utility uses outside of combat. After the initial combat tutorials are over, we're directed towards a nearby statue of Apollo and told to climb it to get a better view of our surroundings. As we climb, Zeus and Prometheus have a funny exchange that actually got a chuckle out of me, as Zeus wants to skip ahead to the more interesting things, while Prometheus protests that this is important to setting up the character's motivations. Once atop the statue, we're confronted by a griffin who's busy carrying off someone and their axe to a nearby rift in the earth. In order to find our next objective, we're introduced to the surveying mechanic, a by-the-now pretty by-the-books Ubisoft mechanic that is admittedly starting to wear out its welcome, but it actually gets the job done, and in this opening area there is actually a surprisingly large amount of stuff to spot: chests, point of interests, upgrades, and a few challenges. We can even spot some stuff on the main island, though we have no way of reaching it just yet. Pondering on how to get down, the game suggests we jump, and uses that moment to introduce to us the fact that we can dive underwater as well as surface, which we do when we land in the pond at the base of the Apollo statue. From there, we're able to do some minor exploring as we make our way towards the rift we spotted in the distance, and as we approach it, we spot the axe the griffin had been holding onto earlier. As we go to grab it, however, it's snatched away and pulled into the rift by an unseen force. Following it, we're treated to a fake game over scream as Zeus mocks Prometheus only for the game to continue a few moments later, as we suddenly find ourselves in Tartarus, which acts as a puzzle dimension made up of platforms, gaps, and locked doors. I'll talk a bit more about the puzzle aspect of this game later, but Tartarus is where the hardest puzzles are located, along with some of the biggest rewards. Halfway through the level, we encounter a set of wings, hinted at to be man-made but broken, and those of you who know your Greek mythology might recognize them, or at least suspect them to be Icarus's wings, though I actually suspect it's the wings of Icarus's father, since the one Icarus had would have been destroyed with him. The wings, however, give us a few new abilities. We can run faster now, and we can double jump. Continuing through the obstacle course sees us finding the axe, which allows us to perform heavy sweeping attacks that work great for crowd control as well as dealing with shielded enemies that the game will now start to throw at us with increasing regularity. At the end of the level, we find a fragment of Zeus's lightning, but rather than be destroyed by it, the wings we found allow us to use the lightning to power ourselves for a few moments and escape the level and return to the real world. Now that we're better equipped, the game directs us to head towards an ancient bridge and make our way across it, which we do with ease thanks to our new wings. Once on the other side of the bridge, we hear another scream for help and rush over, only to be confronted by a Gorgon. Sneaking up on the monster and stealth killing it sees us earning our next piece of gear, the Bracers of Hercules, or Heracles if you prefer. With these, the player is now able to lift and throw heavy stones and pillars, or else push large metal boxes for puzzle solving. From here, we have to do a bit of following the map markers to find where we're supposed to go next. And a very basic puzzle stands between us and our next journey into Tartarus. Upon completing this vault, we're given our bow and taught how to shoot it, as well as learning that Tartarus vaults sometimes contain hidden and optional chests that can be full of rewards to help us along our journey. Now that we're fully decked out and armed, We make our way towards the temple of Apollo that we spotted off in the distance, only to once again see the guy from earlier being assaulted by a group of monsters that we quickly deal with. We get a slightly humorous exchange with the stranger before he reveals he was heading to the temple too and suggesting that we head there together, though a moment later he ditches us and runs off, with our bracers. Following him into the temple has us going through one last simple puzzle before unlocking the door and meeting with the Oracle, who actually turns out to be the keeper of the temple, who reveals that the actual Oracle was turned to stone along with everyone else. In the meantime, this guy's been getting high off his ass on the sacred smoke and is currently so out of it that he starts to question the very nature of reality itself. As we turn to leave, however, something happens, and the man begins to speak in a voice that is not his own, but the voice of the gods, revealing to us a half-riddle, half-guide.
Father of your line is not father of your kin. A mountain, crowned with flowing locks, is how you win. The monster shambles, hungry for immortal flaws. The true hero owns them all, stolen from the beast's jaws. With the winged herald's aid, go on the attack, and sooner than later, change them all back. A pearl of seas, forge fires lit, a wise child convinced, a feather's weight of wit. Eldest of Thetis, father overthrown, hero on high, it's time for you to come home.
Pondering what the man has said, the thief from before reappears, apologizing to us and says that he understands part of what was said, and that in order for us to continue, we need to get to the main island. To do that, we'll need two things. One, to find the missing pieces of the wings we found already, and two, to find a magical jar of wind. A nearby Tartarus vault provides us with the jar of wind, and a puzzle near the observatory rewards us with the rest of the broken wing fragments, while also confirming that not only do the wings belong to the great inventor Daedalus, but that he is the architect of the island we are about to explore for the rest of the game. Returning to the stranger who's atop of the observatory, we show him the stuff we've got and he starts to tell us what to do next, only for Typhon to emerge from his mountain and try to attack us. That's when the stranger uncorks the jar of wind and tells us to use it and our newly completed wings to push Typhon back for now, which we do in a somewhat anticlimactic fashion. Rightly so, Fenyx is a bit shook and demands to know what is going on before we're willing to do anything else. And exasperatedly, the stranger reveals himself to be the god Hermes, the winged messenger of the gods, and directs Fenyx to jump and use the remaining wind in the jar to reach the main island before making her way to a location called the Hall of the Gods. And from there, he will explain everything else. One thing that I really enjoyed about this game are all the asides, comments, and narrations that Zeus and Prometheus make as the player plays. From quick little quips and zingers to debates and accusations, these two narrators definitely come off as having a lot to say to each other. And I really enjoyed how the writers didn't just limit themselves, as several times Prometheus will comment on historical events that haven't happened yet, or certain individuals that don't exist, with Zeus also providing insight into events or historical moments as he experienced them, rather than as we the player might know them to be. I particularly enjoyed Zeus's slight ignorance into how his fellow gods and goddesses came into being, with him not knowing the real truth behind Aphrodite's birth, for example. The voice acting is wonderfully done, and the banter really does have this feeling of two very old friends who are past the point of niceties, having a conversation with each other. Zeus, of course, is his constantly arrogant self, with most of his comments being either self-aggrandizing, self-centered, or self-assuring, as well as sometimes condescending or outright resentful of being reproached. Prometheus, on the other hand, comes off as wise and patient, his observations of the world often leaning into poetry and imagery. When the character comes across a new temple or point of interest, he'll often chime in, relaying the history or significance of that spot within the world, with many of them having nods to classic Greek myths and legends. In particular, I enjoy the dynamic that these two have with each other. Zeus liking stories that are action-packed and flashy, with lots of fighting and blood and probably sex, while Prometheus prefers a slower, more contemplative story. Several times, Zeus even tries to hijack the story, inserting his own elements into it, or else cajoling Prometheus to hurry things along or make them flashier, usually resulting in an unexpected boss battle for the player. Overall, while I understand some people might not like the narration and monologuing, I personally enjoyed it, as I feel it adds a little something to the setting and helps inform the player of where they are and what's going on. But if it's not your cup of tea, there is also a setting under the audio option that will reduce or turn it off completely. With nothing else to go off besides Hermes' directions now that we're on the main island, we follow our compass marker and start to make our way towards the Hall of the Gods as he had indicated. Where the starting island was dead and scorched with not a lot of life to it, the main island, at least the part we land on, is lush and green, looking like something straight out of a Greek fresco or poem. I've lamented for a long time in video games that in the pursuit of photorealism and ultra-high-definition 12K graphics, we've all but lost the kind of charm that cartoony graphics can bring to a game. And to me, Immortal Fenyx Rising is a wonderful example of this. Its cartoony style and nature allowing it to create vistas and backgrounds that surpass what could be achieved with photorealism, and instead create something borderlining on the mythical. After about 10 minutes or so, we reach the Hall of the Gods and meet up with Hermes, and we're finally given some information about what exactly is happening around here. Typhon, the most dangerous of the Titans, has broken free from the chains that Zeus bound him with. In his rage, he's already killed several lesser gods, while some of the more powerful gods he's transformed into twisted and crude reflections of themselves. Luckily for us, Hermes stole a tiny piece of Typhon's eye, so for now, he can't see us here in the Hall of the Gods. That being said, that protection won't last forever, and we, as the player character, are no match for Titan as we are now. What we need now is the combined strength of the remaining gods, as well as the aiding favor from some of the surviving lesser gods. Hermes tasks us with finding and bringing back 4 gods from the main Greek pantheon: the god of the forge, Hephaestus, the goddess of wisdom and hunters, Athena, the goddess of beauty and love, Aphrodite, and Ares, the god of war and battle, all of whom can be located in different parts of the Golden Isle that were modeled and built specifically for them by Daedalus. And it's here that we're turned loose and allowed to start our adventure proper. But rather than charging off into the unknown, I spend a few more minutes getting a tour of the Hall of the Gods and acquainting myself with the tools available to me. Like most open-world RPGs, there's ways to increase my stamina and my health, but collecting certain items out in the wild and then spending them here, there's also a forge to upgrade my weapons, my armor, my inventory capacity, and even my appearance, including an option to completely change my gender if I no longer feel like playing as a female character. Which honestly, I really do appreciate, and I wish that more games would offer this option after character creator. There's a skills and ability leveling station, as well as weekly challenges and generic challenge boards where I can earn additional rewards for performing random tasks out in the world. And sadly, yes, there are microtransactions and a store for them, but we'll talk about that a little later. For now, I decide to run a few quick challenge missions, which see me running across the island gathering crafting materials for potions, slaying a few basic monsters, and solving a few very basic puzzles, until at some point in the haze of busybody questing, I find myself in the Forge Lands, the domain of the god of the forge, Hephaestus. Following the quest marker and some light hinting at by the player character, I climb to the top of Hephaestus's giant statue, which towers over almost every other structure in his domain, and from there I'm given a truly breathtaking view of the Forge Lands, as well as directed to a few local points of interest. Yes, there is also the obligatory Ubisoft scouting mechanic in which you guide your reticle over points of interest and then mark them, thereby unlocking them on your map, but by now I'm familiar with Ubisoft's song and dance, so it doesn't quite bother me like it will some people. Jumping down from the statue, I again follow the map marker and find myself in a cave with an automaton, who seems to be trying its hand at making art. That is to say, a statue of itself. Chatting with the statue quickly makes something apparent. He's lost both of his hands. As he puts it, they just got up and left one day, very agreeable-like. Finding the pair of runaway hands is another case of me following the map marker before doing battle with a few waves of enemy before returning to the robot and reattaching his hands. Doing so allows the robot to better create his art, and it's about here that I kind of start to wonder something casually. Throughout the Forge lands, I've been seeing and walking by these statues of automatons that are in various poses. Some are clearly in the middle of work, others seem to be fleeing from battle, some look like they're having a mental breakdown, and others are just smashed to pieces. Could these perhaps be some kind of storytelling analog for what is happening when Typhon attacked Hephaestus? Speaking with the automaton some more has us remembering part of the prophecy we heard from the oracle, of Forge's fires relit. Realizing this must pertain to Hephaestus's forge, we turn our attention towards the task of getting it restarted, as the giant structure has fallen silent. Luckily, our friend here knows just how to do this, and gives us a series of missions to complete that sees us reigniting the coal fires, opening the vents to allow the bellows to breathe once more, and then freeing up the gumped-up water wheel to help regulate the forge's temperatures. Completing all 3 missions has us unlocking the heart of the forge, which is Hephaestus's workshop. Doing so also reveals to us that the automaton we've been talking to this whole time actually is Hephaestus, the god of the forge. But that in order to take away the Forge Master's genius, Typhon ripped out all of the pain and suffering that Hephaestus has felt over the years. Small tangent here, I consider myself to be modestly knowledgeable about Greek mythology. Like, I know the legends most people know, and a few of them that most people don't know, and I know the core gods that everyone knows as well, so I find it really cool that this game was able to teach me things that I did not know about Greek mythology. As it turns out, our friend Hephaestus has not led an easy life, something that's on full display as we descend into a hidden Tartarus vault, which contains his hidden and stolen essence. I won't spoil everything we learn in the vault, but I will say that after completing it and regaining Hephaestus's essence, I'm kinda shocked that he's a good guy and not a villain who would want to kill Zeus, especially since throughout the vault, Zeus makes it pretty clear that he sees Hephaestus as little more than a tool to be used when he's useful and tossed aside and ignored when he's not. Returning to the Hall of the Gods, we reunite Hephaestus with his essence, and thus free him from the twisted form that Typhon had imprisoned him in. Now free from Typhon's influence, Hephaestus reveals something to us. Typhon didn't build the vault that held Hephaestus's essence. He, Hephaestus, did, and that more than once he's hid his negative emotions and memories there when the burden of them became too great. But he always left himself clues before that allowed him to rediscover himself, but that this time, Typhon was able to corrupt his assistants and use them to break the chain of clues and therefore trap Hephaestus in a mindless automaton existence. He explains that Typhon's greatest power is to make it seem like he is doing the right thing, even when the outcome of his meddling is a detriment to everyone else. With that, Hephaestus becomes a permanent occupant of the Hall of the Gods. 1 god down, 3 more to go. Also, another small tangent here, throughout Hephaestus's quest line, we've heard him referred to as the disfigured god several times, so I was expecting to see him covered in burn scars or maybe missing several fingers from forging accidents or some kind of horrible disfigurement, but when I saw him for the first time, the thing I just thought was, he's hot! Maybe it's just the artistic direction the designers decided to go with, but I don't think he's disfigured in any way. Sadly, for as much praise as I've given the game thus far, I do have to ding it a bit for being a single-player experience that includes microtransactions and a premium currency storefront. Now, there is an in-game way to earn premium currency, which is appreciated. The player is able to run 3 weekly missions worth 30 Electrum each, along with a much harder Tartarus Vault challenge that can award up to 260 Electrum if you succeed at its quickest time frame. Now, credit where it's due, most of the items from the shop are simply cosmetic, fancy-looking armors or weapon skins that only affect the player's appearance, which if I'm honest, I don't mind. On the other hand, the player can also use their Electrum to buy crafting materials to level up their health and stamina. So in a way, you could say it's kinda, sorta, maybe slightly pay to win, but if it's not multiplayer, then is that really such a big deal? If I'm honest, I personally think the microtransactions in Immortal Fenyx Rising are handled in a pretty good way, especially compared to other implementations that I've seen. Yes, they exist in a single-player game, which admittedly is a bit dumb and pointless, but the game doesn't shove them in your face like some other games do, and the ability to earn premium currency doing weekly challenges means the player is not completely locked out of the system if they don't wish to spend their in real-world hard-earned money. In the end, the whole thing would basically boil down to every few days I'd hit up the Hall of the Gods, check to see what the challenges were and if I was willing to do them or not. So the whole thing was very much a take-it-or-leave-it mechanic for me. After running a few random side quests and leveling up my character stats, I decided that I should start working to free Athena next. Having the goddess of wisdom and strategy on our side can only help us after all. Climbing her statue is a bit harder than Hephaestus's, as she has fewer ledges and alcoves for my character to rest on. Then again, I also have 2 extra bars of stamina, so I'm able to make it to the top with a bit of strategy. No pun intended. Once again, the view is absolutely breathtaking, and it's especially interesting that I can actually see Hephaestus' statue from here, but I don't recall if I saw Athena's statue when I was on top of Hephaestus's. As I tag points of interest to explore, the game directs me to a nearby temple of Athena, where after doing a quick puzzle or two, I'm shown a cutscene of our character wandering around what looks to be a large abandoned courtyard area, only for a statue to suddenly fall and almost crush us, while at the same time revealing a young girl who turns out to be Athena. As it turns out, Typhon's punishment was to turn her into a child. Talking with her has her revealing that she has a plan, but that first we need to deal with a Hydra that Typhon has tasked with killing her. I'm not 100% sure, but looking back, I can't help but wonder if this was meant to be foreshadowing, as the Hydra in question is actually located in the Tartarus Vault, and is not actually rampaging through the countryside looking for Athena. Nevertheless, we drop in, slay the many-headed beast, and head back to Athena, who tells us her plan. We need to become her champion. Once that's done, we'll be able to walk the path and then retrieve Kronos' Staff of Time, which will allow us to re-age Athena to her older self, as well as best Typhon, by rewinding events until he's trapped again. Seems like a plausible plan. Athena gives me a blessing and tells me to learn and observe the heroes of old. Doing so sees us running around to 4 different shrines and reading a set of stone tablets about the heroes before performing some feat that is worthy of them. Eagle-eyed players will also note that the very heroes we're learning about are the same corrupted heroes that Typhon will occasionally throw at us in the form of wraiths, powerful semi-reoccurring mini-bosses that he'll occasionally summon to fight us as we wander around in the overworld. Completing the final shrine has Athena appearing again. Oddly though, when we talk to her, she's rather dismissive of the things we've learned about her past champions. Later on, when we observe her looking at a far-off temple, we comment on it, only for her to become erratic and try to convince us to stay away before leaving abruptly. Left alone, we spot an owl-shaped key and intuit that this is some kind of test, that Athena's previous champions sometimes did not do exactly as she instructed and would instead follow their own instincts, and that this is one of those moments for us. So we take the key and hightail it to the temple, where we wind up encountering a familiar face. The temple keeper / fake oracle of Apollo, still high off his ass and giggling at things. Talking to him has us learning that he tricked Athena by giving her a fake prophecy, the very prophecy we've been working to help her bring about. Small tangent here, but there's a pretty funny little dialogue bit where Zeus is trying to convince Prometheus he knew the Staff of Time was a load of BS, and how silly Prometheus looks for having believed in it, only for Prometheus to point out that, as the storyteller, Prometheus knew from the start that the staff wasn't real, only for Zeus to shoot back that he used the staff to undo the staff, which got a pretty big laugh out of me when I realized he's basically pulling a "I used the stones to destroy the stones" bit from Marvel. Anyways, heading back to Athena's other temple, we do battle with 2 lions before Athena shows up, with a knife. She reveals the lions were to be sacrifices, and that if we are to become like the heroes of old, like the fake prophecy said, she plans to turn us into wraiths. Confronting her about the fake prophecy sees Athena breaking down and revealing that since she was turned into a child, she doesn't actually know what to do, and that having the prophecy gave her something to believe in. We point out that we believe in her, and that we will still help her restore her to her past glory. Bringing her to her main temple, we hope clear away the corruption that's taken over it, and make a formal offering to the once adult goddess of the wisdom. We spend a bit of time talking to Athena about why she is important as a goddess, and in turn, she's given a chance to vent her frustrations at how, despite being the goddess of wisdom, Zeus constantly tried to interject his own opinions and ideas into her judgments, or else would completely ignore her thinking he knew best, which caused her to lose confidence in herself. News which honestly seems to shock and emotionally shake Zeus pretty deeply. With her frustrations vented and her confidence growing, Athena uses some of her magic to open the way to the Tartarus vault where her essence is being held, in another temple. Which I have to admit is kind of a little bit bullshit if I'm honest. Like, we're already at her big main temple. Why wouldn't you put the essence here? But oh well. Jumping into the Tartarus vault has us having to complete a series of puzzles that honestly, I like way better than the ones in Hephaestus's vault. Basically, you have small blocks that are linked up with bigger blocks so that when you move the smaller ones, the bigger ones will move in tandem with them. It's honestly really kind of fun, and I'm able to breeze through the temple in about 45-ish minutes. After each puzzle section, there's a reoccurring boss battle with a Medusa who mocks our character by telling us inconvenient truths, such as our mother and father wanted us to stay home rather than be a shield bearer, that we don't want to save our brother, we want to usurp him, and that our efforts will be all for naught. In the end, we best her each time she shows up, and soon enough we have Athena's essence in hand. Heading back to the Hall of the Gods, we reunite child Athena with her essence and watch as she returns to her normal form. 2 gods down, 2 to go. When Immortal Fenyx Rising released, many people complained that visually it was very similar to Breath of the Wild, with an overly saturated color palette as well as a deliberately cartoony and fantasy aesthetic. And while I won't deny that the game has those things, I do think there is also enough here to set it apart in a few meaningful ways. Firstly, the Golden Isles are absolutely beautiful. Each section of the island has its own aesthetic and design, with the environmental storytelling doing a lot of lifting to help sell the idea that this is a place where the various gods and goddesses of the Greek pantheon lived, played, and visited frequently. The game is particularly beautiful from atop various regions' scouting towers, the high vantage point allowing the player to see most of that region, as well as distant and far-off regions, and how the island fits together. While the game may be visually reminiscent of Breath of the Wild, that's not something I'm going to hold against the game if I'm honest. I think Breath of the Wild is pretty reminiscently visual of several other games. Neither game reinvented the wheel visually, so I'm not going to harp on the look as much as some people did. For me, I got a particular kick out of knowing that the ruin I saw off in the distance wasn't just some backdrop, but an actual location that I could visit if I wished, and that it most likely contained some kind of puzzle and treasure for me to unlock. Additionally, I enjoyed the fact that a lot of these temples and ruins actually seem to serve a purpose. Yes, some of them just house puzzles, but others like Hephaestus's Forge, Athena's Temple, actually served some purpose on the island when it was functional, which I did get kind of a kick out of. All in all, I'd give Immortal Fenyx Rising's graphics a B. They don't wow me every time I see them, but what I saw was consistently good, and I never had any issues with texture pop-in or low-res graphics. Okay, so we got a god who can make weapons and armor, and a goddess who is wise and good at strategy. Now seems like a good time to go get the god of war himself. Ares. Although fun little Easter egg, one of the facial tattoos you can get is Kratos' signature red streak across his eye. Making our way to the land of war, we find ourselves in an environment of broken ballistas, giant arrows sticking out of the ground, and various statues that I can only assume are former monsters turned to stone when they died. Ares' statue is imposing, but luckily for me it's not too hard to climb, and when I do, I'm once again greeted with a spectacular shot of the surrounding area. I'm starting to think these are some of the best visuals in the game when the player is standing atop these statues, as each one of them feels desktop background worthy to me. While standing atop the statue, we spot an animal so majestic it could only be the god of war. And sure enough, after making our way over, we find a bear sitting atop a throne of spears and shields. Talking to the bear sees us beseeching the god of war for his help, only for the bear to get distracted while we're talking by a butterfly and wander off, as well as also reveal that the true god of war is a chicken. Well, a rooster to be exact. Yeah, turns out Typhon turned Ares into a rooster, and normally I'd equate this to some kind of a metaphor. As someone who's owned roosters before, I can tell you they still think they're 50-foot tall meat-eating dinosaurs, when in reality they are not. So you'd think that Typhon did this as a way to put Ares in a form that still thinks it's all tough and powerful, but is actually pretty weak and helpless. But, nope. Ares is pretty much a complete wuss now, lamenting the loss of his powerful body and how he's the laughing stock of the island and blah blah bagok. If I'm honest, it's actually kind of pathetic. Also, who the heck is this bear that's hanging out with him? Like, for a time, I thought maybe Ares had been split into two different forms, both the rooster and the bear, and the bear was the more rational thinking side of Ares, while the rooster was the more quick to anger and jump to action side of the god. But again, nope. In fact, this bear only seems to exist so the writers can squeeze in a few more God of War references, as later on, Ares will tell the bear he is not ready. Kind of like how in God of War 4, Kratos keeps telling Atreus, his son, that he is not ready. Anywho, talking with Ares has him revealing the location of the vault that has his essence, which is covered by a collapsed statue. Looking around, we make do with what we have, and that is to say an impossibly large ballista and an arrow that looks like it could kill a skyscraper with a single hit. And sure enough, shooting the statue with the giant arrow clears the way for us to enter the vault. Now, I gotta be honest here. I think the devs missed a major opportunity. Being the god of war, I expected Ares' vault to be all about combat. I envisioned some kind of arena fight, just battling waves upon waves of enemies until Fenyx stands atop a mountain of their bodies. That's what I would have done. But instead, we get more puzzles. Admittedly, they're kind of fun. Ares' vault is full of these blocks that will float or sink when you strike them, so you can use them to float over gaps and platforms and basically make your own routes through the air. It's actually a lot more fun than I expected it to be, and I blast through the whole thing in about 30-ish minutes. My fastest time yet for a god vault, I might add. After beating the large Hecatoncheires boss that comes out to play, I claim Ares' essence, only to have it snatched away by some unknown male figure who escapes the vault before me and leaves me without my prize. Going back to Ares, we tell him of this, and although he's at first despondent, he reveals he might have a way to help us. Apparently, his daughters, the Amazons, offered him an Amazon tracking kit a while ago. We just have to go and get it from his treasury, which happens to be in his main fortress that Typhon took over, kicked him out of, and trained the doors to only open to the sound of Typhon's own theme music, which he forced Pan the satyr musician to write and compose while in Tartarus, and then play said theme music song on Ares' war trumpet thing. Okay, I'm going to pause here for a sec. Why do I need to be able to open the doors? Can't I just climb the walls like I can pretty much climb everything else in this world? For that matter, how narcissistic/dope is it that Typhon has his own theme music, like canonically in the world? Anywho, so we gotta go find the Vault of Tartarus that Pan was in when he compiled the theme music. Okay, honestly, it's not hard. Make your way through the vault, reassemble the pillar with some notes on it, and boom, done. Next, we find Ares' sacred Fufuzela thing, whatever it's called. This isn't actually hard either, as Ares hid the horn in the jaws of a giant snake skeleton. Apparently it was a pet of his, and he brought it to be here when it died. There's actually even a small puzzle that sees us returning some of the skeleton's broken teeth, but then the jaws open and we grab the horn and bolt. With everything we need, we head to the gates of Ares' former fortress, and again, we're shown a scene that seems to exist only so the writers can reference God of War again, with Ares again telling the bear to go home and that he is not ready. But then it's on to the main event. Blowing the horn with a special tune has the gates of Ares' fortresses opening to us. And honestly, this place is also a bit of a letdown, as thematically, this fortress is made to sound like it's swarming with guards and enemies. But there doesn't seem to be that big of an occupational force here. Reaching the center of the fortress sees us having to complete another puzzle, which opens the treasury and allows us to be beaten to the punch again by the mysterious man from before. Giving chase, we tackle him and find that it's not some minion of Typhon like you'd expect, but instead our own brother, Lagiron, who is no longer turned to stone. Small tangent here, but I actually found myself wondering if this mysterious male was going to turn out to be the bear that Ares has been hanging out with. Like if he could somehow change from bear to human form and was doing this to prove to Ares that he was ready. Which in turn also kind of fed into my idea that maybe Ares was split into two separate beings, each representing different parts of their personality. Anywho, speaking with Lagiron has him revealing he only just woke up, but that he's spoken with the Oracle of Apollo like we did, and heard the same prophecy. He's interpreted it differently, however, and is taking it to mean that it's his job to save the world, while at the same time, in order to do so, he has to convince us, Fenyx, that that is his job. Like us, he's nabbed a few magical baubles as well that allow him to move about the island and complete its various challenges. But there's something strange about him. For one, he looks way too big to be our brother. I mean, look at him. He looks like he's 3 feet taller than us. Secondly, his appearance looks nothing like us. And thirdly, he's oddly dismissive of our interpretation of the prophecy, as well as all the things we've managed to do without him. Still, he says he has a plan and gives us back Ares' essence when we ask for it, and tells us to come find him once all the gods are back to their old selves. Heading back to the Hall of the Gods, we find Ares waiting for us. And if I'm honest, Ares is so far my least favorite god. As a chicken, I hate his defeatist attitude, and as a god, he brings very little other than frat boy do bro energy that comes off as strong and dumb. Which is strange, because in his vault, he laments that big and dumb is the only way Zeus ever saw him. Now yes, Athena is the one with all the strategy and wisdom, so I'm not expecting like Sun Tzu or anything from Ares. But I guess I was just expecting someone more like a drill sergeant, or maybe a gung-ho general, rather than a guy who looks like he'd crush a beer can against his enemy's skull. Oh well. Only one goddess to go. Let's go get Aphrodite.
Combat in Immortal Fenyx Rising may on the surface look rather simple and easy, and to some degree it is. But it also has a layer of depth to it that can be rather enjoyable. Yes, if a player wants, they can just spam the basic sword and axe combo to get through most encounters. And there were plenty of times that I did just that, especially when dealing with larger groups of enemies that are mostly the same. But other times, I decided I wanted to try and make combat as interesting and as flashy as I could. So I'd dive off a cliff and slow-mo pepper the enemies below with arrows before rolling to my feet and charging the nearest fat gorgon with an Athena dash, before dodging out of the way of an incoming strike, triggering a spark of Hephaestus, and an additional moment of slow-mo, the perfect opportunity for me to roll towards the nearest enemy and get in a few hits before time resumed normally, and the remaining monsters charge me. As the game goes on, combat really opens up, providing players with new ways to engage with it if they're willing to meet the game halfway. Since unlocking new abilities and moves is tied to the mechanic of the Charon coins, which in turn requires the players to interact with some of the game's puzzles and mechanics. Most abilities can be upgraded, allowing them to hit harder or more often, or else deal some kind of disadvantage to your enemies. In particular, I found the shield charge of Athena to be useful when dealing with groups of enemies, and being able to pick up boulders and throw them was always a treat. Phosphorus's dive attack was also particularly useful for breaking a target's combo, and more than once I used it to cheese enemies I wanted to keep at bay while I handled closer and more annoying enemies. Enemy variety is about what you'd expect, and fills various combat roles needed for an open-world game. There's plenty of corrupted wild animals that would love to eat you, ranging from wild boars to bears, chimera, and even wild roosters, which admittedly I was a bit amused and confused by until I learned Ares had been turned into a chicken. These corrupted wild animals roam the countryside and aren't meant to be so much a threat as they are an obstacle for you to navigate around or through in your journeys. Since combat is not tied to any kind of leveling system, a player has the choice to simply go around almost any encounter they wish, though defeating animals and monsters does award blue adamantite, which is an ingredient needed in most armor and weapon upgrades. For our actual intentional combat encounters, the game has a variety of more mythical creatures to throw at you. Flying harpies, slow but hard-hitting gorgons, charging minotaurs, cursed, or maybe corrupted gladiators and their commanders, massive hulking giants, and hecatoncheires, which sadly are just giants with a new monstrous skin. Lastly, each type of monster in the game can have a mini-boss and legendary variant, who will usually have some additional gimmick or ability that makes them harder to kill than their lesser counterparts. Sadly, most of the monsters don't have a wide range of abilities as the player does. Though some of the larger creatures are capable of throwing boulders at you, the majority of enemies will just try to get in close and either slam or swipe at you. Though flying enemies do have both a dive bomb and some kind of fiery projectile that they can shoot at you.
In addition to the monsters, Typhon does have a small collection of fallen heroes to throw at you. These are heroes from famous legends like Atalanta, Heracles, and others who are significantly harder to deal with. Luckily for the player, Typhon can't spam these heroes, and if you manage to find their hidden vaults, you can beat them for good and take them away from him. Overall, I'd say combat in Immortal Fenyx Rising is serviceable. It's nothing amazing or groundbreaking, but if you're willing to put in the effort, you can certainly have some encounters that make you feel like a badass warrior of old. Like Breath of the Wild, Immortal Fenyx Rising has two main ways of interacting with its setting, either through combat with various enemies found during a player's adventures, or puzzles that the player stumbles upon and solves for some kind of reward. Simply put, Immortal Fenyx Rising loves its puzzles, having several different kinds, from push and pull tile puzzles, pressure plate puzzles, constellation puzzles, remember the tune loot puzzles, and pretty much any level that takes place in Tartarus as a long-form obstacle course puzzle. Most puzzles are well thought out and might only take a few minutes to solve. Others are crushingly difficult, requiring the player to have unlocked certain abilities without ever actually spelling that out to the player. Sadly, there isn't really a way to know ahead of time if the puzzle you're going to be doing will be an easy and fun one, or one that requires a specific ability. Several times I had to leave a puzzle half solved after realizing I wasn't going to be able to finish it just yet because I was lacking some ability. I should also mention that several times out in the open world, I was able to sequence break several puzzles and best them using means other than what was intended for by the game developers. But rather than be a detriment to the game, I actually kind of look at this as an odd sort of bonus. Not only does it make me, the player, feel kind of smart, but story-wise, it implies that Fenyx was able to come up with a solution that Daedalus, the designer of the puzzle, could not, which is kind of cool if I'm honest. I will confess though that after a certain point, the puzzles do become a bit annoying and repetitive. Not only that, but as someone who can be a bit puzzle dumb, I did have to look at a few puzzles online to figure out how to get past them. Overall, while the puzzle motif does fit in nicely with the Greek aesthetic, it does tend to overstay its welcome, and after a certain point, I found myself getting really sick and tired of all the puzzles this game tries to throw at you. Aphrodite is the last goddess we need to find and change back to her original self, and after climbing her statue and admiring the view, a strange tree catches our eye. Knowing the routine by now, we make our way there and, sure enough, find Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, turned into a tree, and has also had her personality inverted. Whereas before she was vain, selfish, and obsessed with herself, now she's been forced to be kind and charitable and caring for others, mainly the animals who come to graze on her fruits. And I gotta be honest, I fucking hate her voice. Like, in a primal kind of way.
Me? Start a war? I don't know where you get such outlandish ideas. True beauty is found in acts of service. True love is the giving of yourself to others. The name Aphrodite should have stood for those things all along.
She did not just say that.
It's way too high-pitched and airy, like they were going for some Disney princess and then gave her some helium, and then also removed all of the bass from it. It doesn't help that out of all of the gods, Aphrodite she kind of sucks. She's vain and self-centered and has probably caused the most problems out of all the gods in the pantheon, save for maybe Zeus. But whatever, the game says we need her, so... Talking with her reveals that her vault is located behind one of her roots, which we'll need to encourage to move. Fenyx, having been an unsuccessful farmer in her previous life, knows that salt might do the trick, and although Aphrodite points out that her roots are hardy and strong, Fenyx knows just the salt to use, the sea salt foam that Aphrodite spawned from in the first place. Luckily for us, Aphrodite knows how to recreate the events of her birth without birthing a new goddess of beauty. So off we run to a little grotto where a Cyclops is guarding a pearl in an oyster. After slaying the Cyclops, we're tasked with guiding the pearl along a little valley and past a few more combat encounters. And as we do so, we learn that Zeus doesn't actually know the circumstances of Aphrodite's birth, and has been told a slightly sanitized version of events. For those of you who are curious, Aphrodite was created when the Titan Kronos did battle with the god Uranus, the god of the sky, and during battle cut off his balls and threw them into the sea. Man, Greek myths were kind of wild, weren't they? Anyways, once we've guided the pearl to the sea, it starts to foam and we gather that foam up,
ignoring what it's a metaphor for, and return to Aphrodite and apply the foam to her roots. As we do so, Typhon becomes infuriated and sends the wraith of Achilles to deal with us. And after a brief battle with him, Aphrodite reveals that the sea foam is helping, but that more salt will be needed. Also, she reveals the location of Achilles' lair where we can go whoop his ass once and for all, which we do. Turning our attention to the task of gathering more salt, we decide to gather the 3 tears Aphrodite shed when her true love, Adonis, was killed. Unfortunately for me, the player, the tears are located in 3 different vaults of Tartarus. I won't go into a ton of detail about these vaults, as by now I'm starting to get a bit tired of them, but I will admit that one of them does have a somewhat fun mechanic that basically has you playing Angry Birds in order to knock down walls and guide a boulder along various paths to reach specific pressure pads and switches. Once we have all of her tears, we return to Aphrodite and begin to apply them to the roots covering her vault. This has an unintended consequence of causing Aphrodite to remember Adonis and become depressed and sad. When we go and talk to her, she's visibly upset by what we did and dismisses our attempts to explain why we need her old fiery self and self-absorbed self back. In the end, Fenyx comes up with a bold plan. For those of you who don't know, the goddess of chaos once held a contest between 3 other goddesses, with Zeus challenging Immortal to pick the fairest and most beautiful among the 3. Of course, the 3 goddesses tried to cheat, with Hera offering the man great power and wealth, Athena offering him great glory and skill in battle, and Aphrodite offering the man true love. Being just a mortal man, Paris chose true love, which turned out to be Helen of Troy, which is what kicked off the Trojan War, by the way. Anywho, for winning the contest, Aphrodite was given the Golden Apple of Discord, our latest option to bring out her old self. So we hightail it to Aphrodite's nearby palace and solve a quick apple-themed puzzle before gathering the apple and bringing it to her. And unsurprisingly, this works. Kind of. It does bring back a spark of the old Aphrodite, but at the same time she expresses worry that if she changes back, things will go back to how they used to be. As it turns out, a lot of gods were pretty exasperated and annoyed by her. But Hermes and Fenyx convince her that her old self was okay and that she was just behaving the way she's supposed to behave. Okay, I need to stop it here for a moment because this whole setup bugs the crap out of me. For anyone who knows anything about Greek mythology, Aphrodite is easily one of the worst goddesses. She's vain, selfish, self-centered, abusive to her husband, and thinks she is better than everyone else by virtue of her beauty. She fucking sucks. So I really hate that Fenyx tells her that it's okay to be all of those things, and that she shouldn't be held accountable for them. Now, yes, I'm not saying some of Aphrodite's feelings are not justified. She was, after all, forcibly married to Hephaestus against her will, but that doesn't give her a free pass either. Honestly, out of all the gods we've worked to free, Aphrodite is the one goddess who, if I'm honest, I prefer in this twisted and warped state. In this state, she's kind, selfless, and caring, and cares more about helping others than helping herself. Now, yes, one could argue that she's experiencing a form of toxic generosity, the kind that can easily be taken advantage of and manipulated. But to me, the world would be better served if people were more like that than if they were selfish, self-absorbed, egotistical, and wrapped up in their own beauty. Okay, rant over, back to the game. Heading into Aphrodite's vault, we find it overgrown with corrupted seeds, which we burn away after solving their associated puzzles. And upon returning to the Hall of the Gods, we restore Aphrodite to her former self. With all the gods restored, now we get to deal with Typhon. In Season 2 of the Netflix show Blood of Zeus, after the death of Zeus, Gaia, mother of the earth, tells the remaining gods of Olympus that after Zeus's funeral there will be a grand tournament, where any god who wishes to vie for the crown of Olympus may compete against those who wish the crown for themselves. Naturally, every god is interested in this, and although the lesser gods generally play fair, the core of the pantheon and the upper echelons of the gods almost instantly begin conniving and scheming amongst themselves, concocting plans that would see them winning the stone and crown and rule over Olympus. The scheming becomes so bad that by the end of the season, the gods abandon Gaia's challenge in favor of a second all-out war against each other. In the end, the main character of the show, Heron, the prophesized hero of the gods, lays dead having been stabbed to death by Hades in a fit of jealous rage after having won Zeus's crown, causing Gaia to furiously declare that none of the gods are worthy, that they are petty and cruel and have forgotten their duties to each other as well as the mortals below. That if blood and battle and pain is all they desire, then she will give it to them by speaking the name no one dares to speak, and unleashing her most powerful son upon the world once more, the all-powerful Titan, Typhon. Although the events of the show are not canon to the official legends and myths about the Greek gods, it does touch upon a fundamental cornerstone of most Greek myths involving the gods. Mainly, that Gaia in her accusations is right. The gods, for all their power, knowledge, and might, are also weak-willed, petty, vindictive, and prone to fits of jealousy, rage, and maniacal whims. With Zeus in particular seemingly unable to keep his dick in his toga for more than a week, before flittering amongst the various mortal women to sire a pantheon's worth of demigods and heroes, most of whom he will completely ignore as they grow up, only recognizing them after they have proven their worth or value in some heroic way. This concept of the flawed and fallible gods isn't new, nor is it even original to the Greek mythos, as plenty of gods from the classical eras were depicted as having flaws. In fact, if I'm honest, I can't really think of a single old world religion where a pantheon of gods didn't all have their own drama and baggage with one another. So if the gods are imperfect, why do we, or did we, put our faith in them for so long? Why then, for thousands of years, did we pray to them, make offerings to them, and build great monuments and temples to them? Ask any number of people that question, and you will get an almost infinite sea of responses. But in the end, it boils down to this. We as humans, as thinking, logical, rational creatures, do not like it when things happen randomly and by chance. It drives us crazy when we see something happen for seemingly no reason, and we will search almost indefinitely for some kind of an explanation. In the old days, before science and technology allowed us to understand most natural phenomena, the idea of gods and goddesses were a way to explain the unexplainable. Why did the sea swell and destroy that village on the seashore? Because the village offended the god of the sea, who punished them. Why is this warrior so much more skilled and talented in battle than his fellows? Because he has the blessing of the god of war and battle. Why are the crops withering and dying in the fields? Because the goddess of the harvest is unhappy with us. In the modern world, we can look at each of the above scenarios and point to more scientific reasons. The sea swelled and destroyed the town because an underwater earthquake caused the water to recede and then come rushing back in the form of a tsunami. That warrior comes from a family of warriors, so his genetics are disposed to give him a better physique and body, and with his family's tradition of being warriors, his training probably started earlier than others. The crops are dying because a fungus that normally lies dormant in wood has awoken by the fires that ravaged several villages from beyond the nearby mountain ranges, was then picked up by the wind and carried to our fields. Ancient people might not have been able to come to the same scientific conclusions we did, but that's simply because they lacked the modern tools and knowledge to do so. They were, however, smart enough to know that nothing happens just 'cause. Everything has a reason. It's just that, lacking a scientific reason, they came up with a faith-based one. That there must be a god or goddess who controls X, Y, or Z, and that something must have pleased or displeased them, which is why this is now happening. Side questing is a staple in most open-world games, and Immortal Fenyx Rising is no exception. The game does have a few unwritten fetch quests, the reward of which will be the player having collected enough materials to upgrade themselves or their equipment. But the game also has several named and labeled side quests, usually involving either running a favor for one of the main gods, investigating something strange that's happening on the island, or helping a lesser deity in exchange for a small reward. If I'm being honest, I don't think most of the side quests have an actual effect on the outcome of the game, though one or two of them can yield extremely valuable rewards that make the game much easier, such as the quest to investigate and revive a fallen bird created by Typhon, whom, after feeding it a special seed, will become an ally of yours and grant you access to several additional powers and abilities. Other side quests see the player locating and freeing 5 aspects of Nike, the goddess of victory, gathering magical items as an offering to the god Apollo, using Pandora's box to release a little bit of hope back into the world, and other things of that nature. Like I said before, I don't think any of these missions really contribute to your overall victory, but I do enjoy having them here, and it certainly feels like they help, even if I'm just imagining it. As far as rewards go, most side quests will award the player adamantite shards or else crafting ingredients for potions. Several others will award cosmetic upgrades for your weapons and armor, which is always welcome in my book. Overall, I'd give side questing in Immortal Fenyx Rising a solid B. There might not be a ton of them, but what there is does feel meaningful and really does help to flesh out the world and its lore, even if personally I wish there were more. Surprise, surprise, but the moment we restore all the gods, they begin to argue about how to best go about defeating Typhon, with Athena wanting to use strategy, Ares wanting to bull rush, Aphrodite wanting to flirt with Ares, and Hephaestus being disregarded and diminished. Also, Aphrodite takes this moment to declare that she's pregnant with Ares' child because she fucking sucks, but all the fighting comes to a stop when our brother Lagiron returns and declares that he has a plan. Before Typhon broke free, Hephaestus had crafted a set of chains that could be used to hold the Titan. By using those chains and a single drop of blood from each of the gods, Lagiron says he'll imprison the mad Typhon once more. The gods agree that the plan could work and offer Lagiron their blood, but when we try to join in the plan, he tells us to stay put as things have become far too dangerous for us. And with that, he leaves, leaving us standing in the Hall of Gods as if we haven't been busting our ass all game long. Of course, seeing Fenyx being talked down to like that riles up the other gods, and they give us a pep talk about not accepting what we're told to do, and instead taking the respect we deserve. So with Athena's help, we set off, racing to the edge of the map so we can jump off a cliff and make our way to the King's Island, which up until now has been inaccessible to us. This region of the map is snowy and icy and packed with some of the toughest monsters the game can throw at us. It also has a few mandatory puzzle sections that we must complete in order to continue. Nevertheless, we power through and soon enough find ourselves at the top of the mountain. And it's here that we see Lagiron speaking to Typhon, the two of them secretly working together to create a poison that will kill the gods. Not only that, but Typhon has promised to make Lagiron king of the gods in the new world that he will create. Naturally, we object to this, and a two-stage battle ensues between brother and sister. The first stage of the battle is pretty easy, but the second stage has Lagiron using some of Typhon's power to fight back, which is a little more difficult. As we pummel our brother and demand answers, he pulls the oldest trick in the book and gets us to look away before jumping through a portal back to the main island. Following him, we go through the portal and find ourselves in the center of the island, in a space that hasn't been accessible to us until now. Ahead of us, Lagiron is climbing the mountain, heading for the top. Now, I'm not 100% sure if there was a path that the game wanted me to take, but I've got enough stamina and potions that I just make a beeline up the mountain, and after getting the obligatory "this is the point of no return" message, I jump into the heart of the volcano. And it's here that I think the game does break on me a bit, as I'm shown a starry, unmoving background while hearing dialogue that we heard at the beginning of the game. Luckily, this doesn't keep me from continuing on to Typhon, who after a little grandstanding challenges us to a battle in which we beat him pretty easily, though not without a loss, as Typhon does kill Phosphorus, our bird animal companion. As he fades away, Typhon reveals something to us, the player. Hermes is our father, which, if I'm honest, is a bit creepy since he's portrayed and acts as the same age as our character. Back on Prometheus's mountain, Zeus comments that something doesn't feel right, that there are holes in the story, and how Immortal should not have been able to defeat Typhon so easily. Prometheus eggs Zeus on, finding it amusing that the king of the gods hasn't figured things out yet. He then recounts Fenyx's deeds during her adventures, all while egging Zeus on until the god finally realizes what is going on. Fenyx is a demigod, but not just any demigod. She's a direct daughter of Zeus. Zeus demands to know how Prometheus could know this, and Prometheus reveals that he's been indirectly involved with several events in the story. The storm that brought our ship here, the meteor shower that freed Typhon, they were both orchestrated by him. When Zeus demands to know why, Prometheus asks Zeus why he turned humanity to stone, something up until this moment we the player had assumed Typhon had done. And that's when Zeus begins to tell the truth. He's become disillusioned with humanity, seeing their constant fighting, greed, lust, and desire for power as flaws in their design.
So he turned them to stone in preparation of remaking the world and humanity, as he has done several times before. Prometheus points out that the mortals were made in the gods' image, and that they reflect the flaws of the gods as well, and even goes so far as to compare what Zeus is doing to what Typhon is doing, with the exception that Typhon actually tried to fix things rather than burning it all down and starting over. And it's then that a sound grabs both gods' attention, and they turn to see Fenyx climbing onto the mountain to confront them both while carrying the poison vial Typhon and her brother had created. Realizing that Fenyx has heard everything, Zeus apologizes to her, lamenting that he realizes now that humanity is flawed because the gods themselves are flawed, and that he hopes she rules over them better than he did. Fenyx, on the other hand, rejects this idea, and says that Zeus isn't getting off so easily, that she isn't here to destroy him, and that while the gods are flawed, they have also shown that they can improve and become better, which means so too can humanity. This enrages Typhon, who appears behind us and bellows that perfection is all that matters, and that if something isn't perfect, it should be wiped away. He then grabs us, and in a scuffle, we fling the vial of poison at him, yet somehow, rather than killing him, the poison infuses itself to him, granting him and his minions the ability to injure and kill gods and demigods both, like us. All of this is the setup for one final climactic boss battle, but the game kind of spoils the setup by making us run through one last 4-stage puzzle vault. Once again though, thanks to some of my abilities and upgrades, I'm able to cheese a few of the steps and complete the sections perhaps a little easier than they meant me to be able to. With the puzzle complete, I climb a series of pillars and find myself in the final arena with Typhon. In the distance, Zeus and Ligeron are captured and held in a cell and forced to watch as Typhon and I do battle. This battle is actually a bit of a challenge. Typhon seems to have tripled the amount of health he had previously. Not only that, but he has a lot of wave and area of effect attacks that are tricky to avoid or break my normal attack combos. My god abilities really come in handy here, especially Hephaestus' giant hammer. Once Typhon is reduced to half health, he tries a new tactic, grabbing Ligeron from his cell and threatening to eat him if we don't give up. That plan fails, however, when Zeus starts throwing large jugs of wine at Typhon, which makes him drop Ligeron, while Zeus points out that for someone obsessed with perfection, he made a big mistake, putting 2 people in the same cell. Zeus then disappears for a moment before reappearing with all of the gods we've helped, just as Typhon had started to mock us and tell us that Zeus has abandoned us yet again. The second half of the boss battle is pretty straightforward. After we deal a certain amount of damage, one of the gods will appear and exact their pound of flesh from Typhon in a flashy cutscene attack. Zeus, of course, gets the final blow, knocking Typhon to the edge of the platform while causing the poison in Typhon's body to start eating him alive. As the gods and Fenyx discuss what to do with Typhon, the Titan howls his hatred for the gods before letting go and plummeting into the abyss of Tartarus, seemingly to vanish. And with that, the gods and Fenyx return to the Golden Isles. As a thank you for her heroism and bravery, Zeus resurrects Phosphorus, while also renaming him after Fenyx and granting the bird the ability to die and be reborn from its ashes. Each of the gods then says something nice, and then Zeus says he wants to show Fenyx something, before picking her up and carrying her off onto the next adventure, presumably the DLC. Cut to Prometheus, who's still chained to the frozen mountain and crying out for help, since it seems Zeus went back on his deal. Suddenly, Ligeron appears with a key and instructions from Zeus to free Prometheus, after telling him a story, which starts in the same way Prometheus started our story, which I think is a fun little way to imply a New Game Plus style playthrough. And with that, the main campaign of Immortal Fenyx Rising is complete. Like most modern games today, Immortal Fenyx Rising has DLC, though sadly only one of them continues the story of Fenyx, while the other 2 kinda go off and do their own thing. In preparation for making this video, I asked you, the viewer, if I should break the video into 2 smaller videos, or do one large video and include the DLC in it. Well, you voted and I listened, so get comfy because we've got 3 DLCs to talk about. Released on January 28th, 2021, A New God was Immortal Fenyx Rising's first DLC and saw the titular hero Fenyx being admitted to the summit of Mount Olympus to see if they have what it takes to not just become a god of the Greek pantheon, but also a member of the inner pantheon, that is to say the better known and more recognizable of the gods.
I'll admit this got me pretty excited, as after everything I went through in the main game, you bet your ass I feel that Fenyx has earned a seat at the table, so to speak. Unfortunately for them, and us, and me the player, it's not that simple. Thanks to the events of the main game, we've already proven that we have a right to at least be here on Mount Olympus. But to become a member of the inner pantheon, we have to complete a series of 3 challenges, per each of the gods we helped in the main game: Hephaestus, Athena, Ares, and Aphrodite. There's also a somewhat optional quest that Hermes gives us that sees the player acquiring totems that represent all of the gods, and returning them to their rightful places in Mount Olympus. From this description, I'll admit I was excited to play this DLC. Sadly, the reality of it is not nearly as exciting as you'd think, as the game repackages the idea of the gods' individual vaults and makes the player run through a dozen of them. Now, I suppose if you liked the puzzle challenges of the main game, you might enjoy this DLC. But if I'm being honest, the longer I played the game, the less I found myself enjoying the Tartarus vaults. That's not to say there's not one or two that don't have the occasional interesting gimmick or idea behind them, but overall, I just didn't find the actual execution of these challenges to be all that interesting. It's also not helped by the fact that as far as narratives go, what I've described is basically it. There's no other plots or missions going on in this DLC. Yes, we do learn a bit more about the gods from voiceovers that we hear during their challenges, but none of them are exactly ground-shaking or earth-shattering. Once the player actually completes all of the gods' challenges, she stands before Zeus, who makes an awkward "This is Sparta 300" reference, and then unlocks the way to her final challenge, his trial. Now, of course, Zeus, kinda being the prick he is, feels the need to interfere with our trial, and blasts us with some lightning while arbitrarily declaring that we've failed. Which to me makes no sense, since the character can still stand. If he'd killed me, yeah, I'd accept that I'd failed, but no, he blasts Fenyx with lightning, and while we're still reeling from the hit, declares that we've lost. And that's when the other gods swoop in, pointing out all the unfairness of these trials. That Fenyx did them without any god armor, that she completed them without access to any god powers, and that only when Zeus interfered did she fail. Their combined accusations and pleading moves Zeus, who decides Fenyx has earned one more chance. Which of course means one more vault. Yay. In the end, we triumph and are welcomed not only to Olympus as the god we are, but we're granted the ranks amongst the pantheon and given domain over ensuring the unity of the whole world in recognition of our ability to unify all the other gods in a single task. And that's kind of where Fenyx's story ends officially. Welcomed as a god to Olympus and given a seat at the table, but we don't really get to learn anything else. Okay, so confession time. As I'm sure some of you are starting to suspect, I didn't actually play the New Gods DLC through to completion. Here's the thing. If you're a fan of the Tartarus vaults and their puzzles, then this DLC should be fairly enjoyable for you. It's very clear that the developers had some ideas they wanted to use, but couldn't fit them into the main game's vaults, so they put them here instead. The thing is, I don't particularly enjoy the Tartarus vaults. I don't think they're bad or anything, but the puzzles are not why I decided to play this game and make a video for Immortal Fenyx Rising. So an entire DLC of nothing but vaults that doesn't really do much to push the story forward and only rewards the player in title but not in mechanics or character development is a pretty hard sell for me. In the end, I ended up running through Hermes' little test vault and then the first vault of Hephaestus before deciding I'd seen all I really wanted to see and played all I'd really wanted to play of this DLC. In the end, I'd give this DLC a 2 out of 5 rating. You might rank it higher if you actually like the puzzle vaults, but overall, the DLC doesn't really add a lot to the narrative of Immortal Fenyx Rising. Yes, it's the zenith of Fenyx's arc, the moment where she reaches her ultimate goal, but that's where it gets cut off. We don't get to see her after that, and completing this DLC doesn't have an effect on the main game or its narrative. The setting of Olympus, while pretty to look at, is little more than window dressing. There's nothing really to actually do here. Other than the challenge vaults, or talking to the gods and hear them repeat the same lines over and over and over again, until you advance to the next vault. In the end, I understand narratively what this DLC is doing, but mechanically, I really dislike how they went about it. Which is fine, because coming up next, we have a DLC that completely reimagines the game and its setting. Journey to the East was released on March 22, 2021,
as the second piece of downloadable content for Immortal Fenyx Rising, but sees the player not only playing as an entirely new fixed protagonist, but also exploring an entirely new world based around Chinese mythology. The player now takes control of Q, a brave new hero who wakes up to find the sky split open, humanity turned to stone, and monsters roaming about. However, unlike Fenyx from the main game, Q is knowledgeable about stories and mythology and uses this knowledge to his advantage. As he explores his new surroundings, the sound of an otherworldly singing grabs his attention, and after traveling towards it for a time, he finds himself at a temple where he meets the goddess Noa, who is surprised to see him. The goddess explains that chaos has torn a hole in the sky and is pouring into the world, and that if she is to stop it, she needs to get to her forge and begin her work. However, when we offer to help her, she instead locks us in her temple in an attempt to keep us safe. Not content with being safe, Q figures out a way out of the temple before jumping and gliding across a bottomless ravine to the main island. From here, we climb to the top of a nearby ruin and survey our surroundings, which include a large sacred tree, some giant old dragon bones, the goddess's forge, and a second island further off in the distance. For now, I decide to more or less follow the map markers, so I head to the goddess's forge, diverting once or twice to battle some enemies and gather some nearby treasure. Combat-wise, I'd say Q is pretty much the same as Fenyx, though I think his standard sword attack is maybe a bit faster than Fenyx's, since it seems to be more quick stabs rather than Fenyx's wide slashes. Other than that, combat is basically the same, so I don't really feel the need to go over it again. Arriving at the goddess's forge, Noa chastises us for putting ourselves in danger, before explaining that in order to save the world, balance has to be restored. To do this, she needs two things: the sacred flames that belong to a fellow god named Lord Gong, and an uncorrupted piece of heaven. We explain that we can help her, and she reluctantly agrees to let us before giving us a token to aid in our journeys, a flaming bird who will act as a way to communicate with her, as well as aid us. It's just phosphorus from the main game, but it's still nice to have him back. Because I like to push the envelope a bit, I decided to head to the second half of the island right away. Sailing over another bottomless ravine, I land and quickly get pulled into a battle between Lord Gong and some random enemies. Beating them has Gong complimenting our fighting prowess and asking us to accompany him to a nearby fortress so he can retrieve his family's flames. Arriving at the fortress sees us encountering a new kind of puzzle that requires us to ring a series of bells in a specific order and in a specific time frame. Doing so unlocks the door and allows Gong to retrieve his family's flames. Or it would, except the flames don't seem to be working right now. Gong says it's just his ancestors being picky because he hasn't done battle with their enemies in heaven for a while, and rushes off to a nearby portal, ignoring us when we say we've been to heaven and there isn't anyone there anymore. Following him into heaven, Gong asks us to complete a combat challenge for him that sees us having to do battle with harpies and griffins, while also mostly being unable to land on solid ground. Though at one point I do manage to land on one of the small pillars, which both works to make fighting the harpies easier and harder, as I have a much smaller area to maneuver now. After the challenge, Gong is confused as to why his flames have not yet returned to him. He asks us to accompany him to an ancestral fortress so he may converse with his ancestors directly, but when we get there, he's met with silence. Gong begins to reminisce about the old days, how his soldier and his family's warriors were loyal to him, and how they all died up on the mountain that is now part of the scar. And as he talks, he reveals something we hadn't known up until this point. That he was the one who broke the mountain. That, in a moment when he found himself surrounded by darkness, loss, and anger, he lashed out with all of his might and shattered the mountain, thus dooming all of heaven and earth, much to Q's shock and horror. Gong asks us to go to several nearby outposts of his family's fortress and to reignite the beacon fires that once burned there, which he hopes will rouse the spirits of his ancestors to him, since they are honor-bound to respond. Luckily, we agree, but comment that afterwards we want some answers. Reigniting the beacons sees us completing a few puzzles before grabbing a flaming piece of coal and tossing it into a chute. Kinda like we did for Hephaestus's forge back in the main game. Returning to Gong, we find that his soldiers and ancestors have indeed returned to him,
that it was only to say goodbye as they passed from this world into heaven. In the end, Gonggong thanks his soldiers for their loyalty before letting them rest in peace. As the ghost of Gonggong's soldiers fade, a voice bellows out, giving us a gift in the form of a boss battle with a large fire-breathing dog, supposedly one of the hounds belonging to a Fire Lord. This battle isn't hard, but the dog does have some area of effect attacks that punish a Blitzkrieg style of fighting. Luckily for me, I've got plenty of potions and peaches to heal up with. After the battle, Gonggong, who I will point out did nothing during the entire boss fight, delivers a speech to his ancestors about needing to follow his own path right now, and how the hole in the sky takes precedent at the moment over their war with people in heaven. And, much to his and Q's surprise, the speech works. Gonggong's flames return to him, and he sets out to meet the goddess at her forge. Back at the forge, the goddess is glad to have access to the sacred flame, but still needs the broken and uncorrupted fragments of heaven. Heading out, we quickly find 2 broken pieces of heaven, but sadly they're corrupted. Certain in his theory that the dragons can help, Q heads to the west towards the bones of the once mighty dragons, where he finds corruption has taken root in the form of evil plants and seeds. Using a bit of sequence-breaking bullshit, we burn away the corruption and meet Hong, an aspect of the now-dead dragon whom we freed thanks to us clearing away the corruption. When we ask if he can get us a fragment of a rainbow for our goals, he says he might be able to, but that right now he's more concerned about his sister, who is still trapped by some corruption nearby. Making our way to her, we again burn away the corruption and allow her aspect to roam free. Returning to the forge, we give the goddess the corrupted fragments of heaven that we've found, but also reassure her that with the dragon's help we can purify them. And to help demonstrate our point, we try to get the dragons to come out and speak to the goddess, only to be met with silence from them. When the goddess learns we allowed the dragons to kinda spiritually hitchhike inside our body, she becomes furious, telling us that the dragons are dangerous and that they will draw the darkness and corruption to them like a giant magnet. We push back at her, saying that even if that's true, we don't exactly have a choice. Q also drops this great line about asking if she's just going to imprison him again in the name of keeping him safe. In the end, the goddess relents and allows us to continue on our journey. To help the twin dragons regain their strength, the brother and sister sends us to their ancient temple, which is surrounded by an eternal storm, which after some light puzzle solving, they consume and regain most of their strength. From there, we head to the Jin Mao tree, which supposedly acts as a kind of rainbow bridge into heaven. As the dragons do their stuff though, they're attacked by some kind of giant monkey ogre monster, which we're forced to do battle with and defeat. Afterwards, the goddess reappears and chastises us once more, explaining that while dragons are powerful, they are also beacons for chaos, because their power is barely contained, which is why, during the early days of the outbreak, the goddess was forced to kill them both to keep them from spreading havoc and destruction. She apologizes to Hong and Ning and allows them to complete their ritual to return themselves to their bodies, while also producing a fragment of the rainbow for us to use in our quest. With everything we need, we return to the forge and watch as the goddess and Gonggong work together to create an item known as the 5-color stone. However, when we start to get ready to head out, we're stopped and told that the summit of the mountain is too dangerous for us. The goddess asks us to look at her forge and understand that it contains all of her collected knowledge and skill, and that she hopes Q will use it wisely. When Q questions this, the goddess reveals that a sacrifice must be made for the chaos to be stopped, a sacrifice she is willing to make. And to keep us from interfering, she again imprisons us with a force field, before she and Gonggong head off to the mountain. As Q laments what is happening, a voice we've heard only once before speaks to us, mocking us, and telling us how our attempts to stop the chaos are hopeless. When we demand to know who the voice is, it introduces itself as the villainous Tao Wu. A quick Google search tells me that Tao Wu is some kind of mythical creature that represents recklessness and stubbornness. It is one of the 4 perils, and apparently appears traditionally with a human face, a tiger's feet, a pig's tusk, and a tail that is 18 feet long. When we try to stand up to it, Tao Wu again mocks us, telling us that the scar demands the death of the gods, and while Gonggong and Nuwa survived the initial attack, they had basically given up hope on ever defeating the scar.
That was until Q came along and brought hope back into the world. Enough to make the two surviving gods return to the mountain, where presumably the evil voice plans to kill them both. Realizing it's all a trap, our character manages to break down the force field the goddess had made and makes a beeline towards the mountain, where we find both Noa and Gong tied up and Tao Wu in possession of the 5-color stone. Which I guess is a bad thing. I'm not actually clear what this stone does. A battle ensues, and in the end, Q defeats Tao Wu, who hisses that chaos is inevitable as it dies. Now, standing here at the threshold of chaos, Q and Gong say goodbye to Noa, who uses her powers to seal the chaos away and restore balance to heaven and earth. The end. Okay, so I've got some thoughts about this DLC. Firstly, despite what a lot of other people might think about it, I actually really enjoyed the reskin visuals and settings. Yeah, they may just be reskinned monsters and soldiers, but to me, that kind of mirrors how a lot of mythologies actually have similar creatures that do similar things, but just look slightly differently. Such as how dragons appear in Asian cultures and European cultures. So this complete reskin of the game doesn't bother me at all. Secondly, the voice acting. It's not great. Now, I'd say the main game's voice acting was good, not great or amazing, but good. But something about this DLC's voice acting is just several notches lower to me. I think part of it is because the voice actors will switch between what I assume is a pretty traditional, calm, and respectful way of speaking, before suddenly inserting modern terminology into it. The whole thing just feels kinda out of place and leaves me a bit confused as to the vibe they were going for. Thirdly, while I didn't spend a lot of time on the DLC's puzzles and collectibles, I do have to give the DLC team credit for coming up with entirely new puzzles and challenges for the player. In particular, I enjoyed the windmill puzzle as well as the bell puzzle. Fourthly, while I did enjoy the story, at least in a basic level, I do kind of wish that more information was given to the player about who these people are. Now, one thing I did forget to mention is that, unlike in the main game of Immortal Fenyx Rising, scattered throughout this world there are these lore scrolls that you can read to learn about certain locations and people. That doesn't really scratch the itch in the same way though, especially since after beating the game I don't really understand much about it. Who exactly is Lord Gong? What exactly is a 5-colored stone? Who is Tao Wu? While these questions might be answered by reading some codex somewhere, I feel they also should have been included in the actual narrative of the game, and include some voice acting or some kind of narrative explanation as to what is going on. Lastly, and this one is more as an observation than anything else, I think combat in Journey to the East is maybe a little bit harder than in the main game. Now this could be due to the monsters having slightly different movesets or perhaps adjusted tactics, but I noticed myself getting lower on health than I did in the main game several times, and I relied on health items much more often. Not that I'm complaining, as I was still able to bull rush and steam over most of the enemies without using anything that came close to strategy. Overall, I'd give Journey to the East a 3.5 out of 5, but only if you enjoy the core gameplay loop of the main game. While it may just be a reskin, it's a fun reskin, but its lack of setting and lore explanation and questionable voice acting kinda drag it down for me. That being said, I do see how the devs used Journey to the East as a kind of experiment, to test to see if they could graft the same gameplay loop and enemies onto another culture's mythology, rather than having to start from square one, and that kind of piques my interest a bit. However, if you're not a fan of the main game, this DLC is unlikely to change your opinion. On April 22nd, 2021, the final DLC story for Immortal Fenyx Rising would release. Titled The Lost Gods, it would be a major gameplay shakeup, taking the game away from its third-person action-adventure and instead turning it into a third-person isometric-style game. Though the DLC does return the player to the game's roots with the Greek gods, the player character is a brand new female character named Ash, who starts her adventure pretty much immediately. Returning to Olympus, we find that Zeus is a liar, and has pretty much gone back to his old ways of trying to rule the other gods by force, despite him saying he'd try to be a kinder god-king in the previous DLC. This has alienated a number of the gods, and caused them to not only leave Olympus, but to instead travel to the Shattered Isles, a prototype of the Golden Isles that Daedalus had constructed and then sunk beneath the waves, but has now been revived by Poseidon. Unfortunately, this is causing a lot of imbalance in the world, and is causing all sorts of earthquakes, floods, and other natural disasters to run rampant. In a cutscene, we're shown Fenyx talking to Athena and lamenting that as the goddess of unity, she's frustrated that Zeus is being so stubborn and cold about everything, even going so far as to put her on lockdown and forbidding her from leaving Olympus. Athena agrees, and as the two of them talk, Fenyx gets an idea. Just like Prometheus did with her, what if the gods can find help from the mortals below? Using a scrying pool, the two gods cast their gaze downwards to Earth, where they meet Ash, a possibly in her 20s or 30s young woman who is working at one of the temples to the gods when an earthquake hits. Seeking shelter, Ash hides against a still being built statue of Fenyx and survives the earthquake, only for Fenyx to mentally reach out to her and ask her for help. A short fade to black later, and Ash is on a boat heading towards the Shattered Isles. When she lands, she's given Fenyx's old sword and axe, and directed to a nearby shrine which acts as this DLC's save point and upgrade station. From there, we do some exploring, dabble in some combat, and eventually come across a gap that we cannot jump or dash across. When Fenyx tries to raise a bridge to aid us, not only does the attempt fail, but Ash's connection to Fenyx is severed. Luckily for Ash, Athena, disguised as an owl and called Owlthena in the game, comes to us and explains what's going on. In order to keep the mortal world in balance, gods can't just snap their fingers and make anything happen that they want. They need to be prayed to by a mortal, and usually need to be made some kind of an offering. Luckily for us, Ash is immortal, so she can do the praying and the offering making, provided that she has the correct items in her inventory. Gathering the right ingredients, Ash makes an offering to Fenyx at her shrine, which restores their connection and allows us to continue on to the next section of the island. Athena appears again and informs us that this is the domain of the goddess Hestia, who is the goddess of home and hearth. Kind of ironic since her domain is filled with lava and rampaging monsters. As we explore, we come across a Tartarus vault, and after solving its puzzles, we're introduced to two things. Firstly, a corrupted tablet, which seems to be playing a role in all the natural disasters that are befalling the mortal world. And secondly, the god Hades, who welcomes us, confirms our suspicions about the tablet, and asks us to destroy the other 11 that are scattered across the island before poofing away. From here, the game opens up. We battle some monsters, learn to do an air dash, get introduced to the gem system, I'll talk about that in a bit, and eventually we find some broken jump pads, and after gathering the right materials, we make an offering to Hephaestus to repair them, and are now able to move to the next island, which turns out to be the domain of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, plants, and the cycle of life and death, who Athena describes as a crazy plant lady. It doesn't take long for us to find Demeter, who comes off less as a crazy plant lady though, and more like a whirling dervish, someone who has 1,000 things to get done but keeps getting distracted or interrupted when she tries to do them. Talking with her sees her telling us she has far too much to do and is unable to listen to anything we have to say, or even think about going back to Olympus. When we offer to help her, she gets us to gather some waters of life and then bring it to her garden before giving us the ability to climb walls. Exploring the new area sees us unlocking a few more altars before finding the waters of life. Demeter's garden, it turns out though, is in Tartarus, however, which means another Tartarus vault. Yay. Luckily, this one is less puzzle vault and more of just a maze vault with some combat sprinkled in, which was a nice change of pace. Arriving at Demeter's garden sees Demeter distraught as someone, or something, has been tearing it up and ruining things. Looking around, we follow some clues and find a nymph nearby who's the culprit, but defends itself by saying it's just looking for a place to live. Deciding to do the nice thing rather than the speedy thing, Ash and Fenyx set about to help make the nymph a new home. First, by finding a nice riverbank, then by evicting the monsters already living there, then by banishing the nearby corruption in a puzzle that is truly infuriating, and lastly by using the waters of life to help make the plants around the riverbank extra healthy. Doing so sees the nymph happily moving in, while also allowing Demeter to take a break and reflect on things before agreeing to go back to Olympus, for now. From here, I decide to do a little exploring and run a fast side quest for Poseidon, involving locating these stink flowers and collecting 12 of them, which isn't too hard because they grow in batches of 4, which is nice, though when I go to hand them over to him, he doesn't show up, meaning I just have these stinky flowers from now on. Anyways, with one goddess down, I decide to try and go find Hestia. But I wind up getting sidetracked once I arrive to the snowy north, the domain of Boreas. According to Athena, he's the god of cold, winter, ice, and maybe the north, and is generally just a codgery old man who doesn't really get along with anyone. In fact, Athena even mentions if it weren't for the whole cosmic balance of the universe and all, she'd rather leave the old bastard here. But since we're trying to save the world, we need him, so on I go. And honestly, this environment sucks. For one, there seems to be significantly less shrines here than on the rest of the island. Not only that, but there's a large valley section that not only has no shrines, but has mountains that are too high for the player to climb over, meaning the only way out, at least for now, is a single mechanical pillar that the player must raise and lower like an elevator. I seriously got stuck in this valley and spent 15 minutes wandering around completely lost and confused as to how I was supposed to get out. When I finally did find my way out, I did my best to follow the path which slowly leads up the mountain towards its peak. And it's here that the game throws a couple new tricks at us, including swapping the camera angle to a more side-scrolling style, walling off some sections of the mountain with a kind of magical cold that drains our stamina, and hurling giant snowballs of ice and snow at us, which is apparently something Boreal just does when he's annoyed. Also, as a kind of added screw you to the player, missing your jumps or failing to land on the platforms or running out of stamina mid-jump will result in you falling down into the valley I mentioned before, resulting in having to run back to the one way out and then to the nearest shrine so you can fast travel to the next shrine on the mountain and try it all over again. About halfway up the mountain, we run into Poseidon for the second time, and he gives us a dopey little side quest like last time, to go find the clothes he scattered about to dry, on a snowy mountain. Finding the clothes isn't hard, though I can't help but notice that when we pick them up, each of them is labeled as Poseidon's underwear. And of course, when we go to hand in the quest, Poseidon is nowhere to be found, meaning I now have 12 stinky flowers and 5 pairs of Poseidon's underwear in my inventory. Sometimes it ain't easy being the main character. Continuing on, we reach the peak of the mountain and find ourselves entering Boreas's vault. Fun fact, when I walked up to the entrance of this vault, the game told me I didn't have enough stamina upgrades to complete the vault, but I was able to do it just fine with my current level. So either I cheesed the vault in some way, or maybe the armor I found in the vault bumped me up to where I needed to be. It's hard to say, but I felt it was funny enough to mention. Making our way through the vault, we continue to dodge snowballs, and as we hop from platform to platform, we solve puzzles. About halfway through the vault, we find Phosphorus frozen in ice and have to free him using a flaming ball of coal, some torches, and a quick puzzle. With Phosphorus now free, he dies, but is then reborn and grants us the ability to hang on to him while he glides around, allowing us to use the wind currents in the Tartarus vault to get around and complete it. Completing the rest of the vault is a matter of platforming, and when we step out, we're greeted by nothing. Boreas isn't even here, and the game instead paints a new map marker and tells us to make our way there. But first, we have to solve a puzzle, and in order to do so, we're directed to go back the way we came, and it's about here, at this point, that I, in real life, had an epiphany about this DLC. See, I got up to use the bathroom because I'd been playing it for like 3 hours straight, and when I got back, I sat down, I stared at my TV for a few seconds, and then I checked my phone, sent some text, got pulled down the rabbit hole that is YouTube videos, and before I knew it, 15 minutes had passed. And in that 15 minutes, I realized I was having more fun than while I was actually playing the game. So I started to analyze things. I've been playing this DLC for about 6 hours now. I understand what's going on in the plot, but the whole apocalypse happening to the in-game mortal world is kinda absent from the actual gameplay. In 6 hours, I've managed to find 2 gods, one of which I brought back and the other who's treating me like an errand boy. I just spent the last hour climbing a mountain while some old man of the north, who I'm picturing as the evil snow wizard from when Santa Claus comes to town, by the way, hurls snowballs at me, only to have the old "the princess is in another castle" switch pulled on me. Ash is an okay character, but she doesn't feel like my character, since we basically know nothing about her. At one point, she does comment that her mom and dad died in one of the disasters, and that the temple we found her in took her in recently, but that's it. And honestly, there isn't really anything the game can offer me at this point that makes me want to continue it. Okay, maybe I could think of one or two things, but realistically, they're not going to happen. So, what's the point? So, despite my intention to play all of the DLC all the way through, I turned it off and ended my playthrough there on that snowy and cold mountaintop. Though I did watch a video of someone who had completed this DLC, just so I could be sure there wasn't any amazing twist or anything that would pull me back in, and no, there wasn't. For the record, after having collected all of the lost gods and destroying all the corrupted tablets, we basically find out that this island has some kind of a corrupting effect, and that it's affected Hades, who has become jealous of Zeus and wants to usurp his position as king of the gods. He decides to do this by resurrecting their father, Kronos, the Titan, and defeating him, or so he thinks, as Kronos is significantly more powerful than any single god could ever hope to be. And so while Poseidon and Hades team up to help contain Kronos, it falls to Ash to actually defeat him in combat. While I talked about the combat of the main game previously, the Lost Gods DLC shakes things up enough that I feel like we need to talk about it again, and how it's changed for this DLC. In some ways, I feel like it's a bit of an improvement, and in other ways, it's definitely a step backwards in terms of complexity and options. In terms of melee combat, I feel like the isometric camera angle does offer a little bit of an advantage, as it allows you to see a full 360 degrees around your character, since they're located at the center of the screen. So you won't lose an enemy if they duck behind you, although if they duck off-screen entirely, then the issue is moot. When it comes to ranged combat, I find the new camera to be a big issue, as you can no longer aim for headshots or use guided arrows to ambush targets from around corners or from long distances. Instead, the game forces you into a kind of twin-stick shooter mode, which I greatly dislike, because I'm not good at twin-stick shooters. The player also has lost the ability to charge their arrows, instead rapid-firing arrows when the player holds down the trigger. Although later on the player does get some kind of nymph nature beam attack that functions like a continuously firing arrow. Flying enemies are now also a lot harder to deal with, requiring the player to jump and melee strike them or use the finicky twin-stick lock-on system to kill them with their bows. Another thing the DLC introduces is the use of color-coded gems that can be socketed into your abilities to give them additional effects. It's certainly nothing groundbreaking, but it does change up combat a bit, and I had a fun time figuring out which gems worked best with which weapons or ability types. In the end, I gave my main sword a chance to steal health, my axe a chance to deal a wide AoE damage effect, and my bow the chance to poison enemies. And this combo of gems pretty much carried me until the end of my playthrough. Puzzle vaults make a return in the Lost Gods as well, though they seem limited to the original puzzle types and not the types of puzzles found in Journey to the East. If I'm honest, I'm kinda over the game's puzzles at this point. I'm not really interested in exploring them anymore. Because of the DLC's camera change and taking away some of our abilities from the start, the devs have definitely cut back on our ability to sequence break the puzzles we come across. Also, I will mention, by taking away our guided arrow ability, it makes the brazier puzzles, where you have to light up a series of braziers, much, much harder. Yes, your twin-stick shooty mechanic does auto-lock on to the next brazier, sometimes, but maintaining that lock-on is tricky, and since we can't control the arrow, getting it to fly through the flames of the first lit brazier to the second unlit one can be very tricky and finicky. I also don't have any proof of this, but it feels like tree logs have been adjusted, so they take up more space on a pressure plate now, making it harder to stack them and other items to try and cheese a pressure plate puzzle if you can't find the right block for it. So what are my overall thoughts on the Lost Gods DLC? Well, first thing first, we need to talk about the gameplay changes. If I'm honest, I'm kinda torn on how I feel about them. On one hand, I'm no stranger to isometric style games, while at the same time, though, to go from a fully 3D environment to a fixed angle environment does take away some of the beauty of the world. Vistas like you'd see atop the survey points are no longer possible, and although the game can still convey a sense of scale and size, it's less of a look at that mountain off in the distance kind of scale, and more of a gosh, it's taking me forever to get to the next waypoint kind of scale. Secondly, one thing I extremely dislike is that saving the game is now tied to the player having a specific item in their inventory, an Olympian fig. I really dislike this mechanic, as the main game and previous DLC let you save manually whenever you wanted. Now true, I don't think I ever found myself lacking for figs to save with, so maybe this is just a personal bias. I'm just really not a fan of this outdated mechanic. The new mechanic of making offerings and praying to the gods, I thought I would find annoying, but actually I kinda liked it. It makes the gods feel more present in the world, and gives the player a new reason to indulge in kleptomania, and pick up everything not nailed down. There's some good ideas in this DLC, ideas that honestly I wouldn't mind seeing refined and adjusted, and brought back in more games. It's just that my own motivation to complete this DLC was severely lacking. In the end, though, I cannot argue with the fact that I, the player, wasn't having a lot of fun like I wanted to be while playing this DLC. My time with the game wasn't horrible or even bad, but the longer I played, the more I found myself wishing for the third-person camera back. I found myself wishing for a player character who was interesting, or who I actually knew something about. But mostly, I found myself wishing for better motivation than just go here because map/Fenyx is telling you to do so. Lost God's greatest flaw, in my opinion, is its lack of motivating forces. Why am I, the player, doing the things I'm doing? It's not like saving the world is going to see Ashe turned into a goddess like it did for Fenyx. And what gameplay and storytelling hooks there were just weren't strong enough to keep me wanting to play and see them to their fruition. So I didn't. While playing Immortal Fenyx Rising, I did, however, notice other things that I felt were worth commenting about, but didn't exactly fit into any other section, so I'm just going to bring them all up here. Firstly, during loading screens between the Golden Isles and Tartarus, there's a sort of minigame where you can direct Fenyx's flight, and sometimes pick up shards of adamantite that you fly by every now and then. Back on Xbox One, I think the load times were between 10 to 15 seconds, so you could snag anywhere from 5 to 7 shards if you were skilled. Now though, on my PlayStation 5, the load times are like 5 seconds, so I'm lucky if I can grab even one. I just find that kind of funny that they invented a way to occupy that loading time, but now that the load time is so small, the method they used is almost obsolete. Secondly, the amount of transmog that is offered in this game is pretty impressive, as well as welcome. Pretty much every weapon and armor piece has at least 3 different skins, and then there's the skins that you can get from the Apollo shop after doing his quests and spending his Electrum. So that is pretty nice, and makes it easy to deck out your character in whatever look you want. And I will also give the game credit where it's due for avoiding the idea of sexy armor for players who want to play as a female Fenyx. Thirdly, I would definitely say for anyone interested in playing this game, if you find yourself struggling with any of the puzzles, I would prioritize getting the Fenyx clone and heavy lifting abilities as soon as possible. Having the ability to make your own medium weight statue, as well as the ability to lift heavy metal blocks and maneuver them however you want, definitely allows you to sequence break many of the puzzles. But also, in the overworld, it's not hard to find a rock or a tree trunk and break the puzzles with them, too. Fourthly, one thing I did kind of enjoy at first and then got progressively annoyed with was that occasionally Typhon will shout from his mountaintop about his impending victory, or how the world needs him, or some other megalomaniacal such or other. At first, I kind of liked it, since to me it did sort of make sense, but the dialogue options for him are pretty limited, so after like the 4th time, he starts to repeat himself, and after hours and hours of gameplay, I think I've heard each of his lines like 15 or 20 times. So they become very old very quickly. It's a good idea, it just needs more dialogue to work. Fifthly, as I was playing this game, I actually found myself kind of shocked at how much game there was in this game. Like, each area of the Golden Isles is huge, and packed full of puzzles and combat challenges and other things to do. If this were a traditional RPG game with towns and villages and stuff, I'd be really happy with its size and complexity. Although personally, I would have liked it if each region did have a Hall of the Gods for its own. That way we could go to that, rather than always having to backtrack to the single location anytime we want to upgrade our characters or speak with the gods to turn in a quest. Lastly, and not really related to anything I've covered so far, there's actually an Adventure Time themed cosmetic pack that the player can get, which led me to discover that an actual Adventure Time crossover trailer was made for this game. featuring Finn and Jake encountering and fighting a Cerberus hound before being rescued by Fenyx, who takes off after Finn asks if she's a princess. As a big fan of Adventure Time, I found this to be pretty cool, even if, like I said, it's not really related to anything in the game. Also, it kinda low-key makes me wish we could get an open-world Adventure Time RPG. Can someone please jump on that and start working on it? Now, for all the praise I've given this game, there are a few things we need to talk about in terms of negatives. Probably my biggest complaint is that I'm not much of a puzzle gamer. Like, I don't mind the occasional puzzle, but overall, I'm much more of an action gamer. Well, Immortal Fenyx Rising seems to have tried to split itself down the middle, catering half action RPG gamers and half to puzzle gamers. And after a while, that got really old to me, especially in some cases where they could have done something different but chose not to. Like in my Ares segment, I mentioned that Ares' vault is just another puzzle vault, which doesn't make a ton of sense to me when he is the god of war. Seriously, I would have much preferred some kind of big combat challenge. Additionally, I'm not a huge fan of Ubisoft's climb to the top of the tower and scout around to find points of interest mechanic. Like, the core of the mechanic is fine, I don't mind being sent to the top of some high point to do a quick survey, but the controls to unlock points of interest can be a bit finicky and annoying. I'm really not a fan of, after having located a point of interest, being forced to pull the trigger to unlock that point of interest's icon, as I think the game should just unlock the icon automatically. Also, the minigame to locate the points of interest can be very touchy at times, with the smallest of movements needed to hone in on the exact right spot. Additionally, you can actually enter this scouting mode anywhere in the game just by holding down the right thumbstick. And that is never actually communicated to the player, it's just something I discovered when I was running around and pushing buttons. Lastly, as I mentioned before, I take a major issue with Aphrodite's whole plotline, and if I'm honest, her inclusion in the game at all. I really can't understand exactly what she brings to the table when it comes to combating Typhon, other than she's a recognizable goddess that pretty much any player is going to be familiar with. If it had been up to me, I might have actually chosen Eris, goddess of chaos, as she might actually be an equal match for Typhon's raw power. Overall, when I sat down to play and critique Immortal Fenyx Rising, I wasn't sure what I was going to get. I've played this game a few times, but never really got as invested in it as I did this time. In fact, I don't think I ever got beyond the first god or a few hours into the game. Not because I wasn't having fun, but because I usually had other games I wanted to play at the time. In the end, I'm glad I went back and played this game, because I found a game that, yes, while on the surface reads and looks like a Breath of the Wild's clone, actually has some interesting ideas of its own. Between its visuals, its writing, its gameplay, its exploration of Greek myths and legends, and its willingness to experiment with its DLC, there's a charming game here, one that is surprisingly long and has some fun ideas, and might even be a tiny bit educational, as I came away having learned some things about Greek mythology that I certainly hadn't known about going in. And while I may have beaten the game and its DLC in 23 hours, 6 minutes, and 23 seconds, I could easily see that time investment doubling or tripling if I went back and took the time to complete every puzzle and vault in the main game and its DLC. At the time of its release, critics seemed to think so too, as when it was released, major game retailers gave the game a generally positive review, though they all noted it's a Breath of the Wild's clone. Still, the game did well enough that Ubisoft began to explore the idea of a follow-up, though that game would be set in a world that would explore the Polynesian pantheon and their mythology. And then the game just kind of vanished for a while, until July of 2023, when Ubisoft announced they were canceling the project so as to refocus their efforts. If I'm honest, I find myself hoping in vain that Ubisoft will go back to this series. I could easily see it becoming a semi-regular franchise, with each game exploring different ancient cultures, their pantheons, as well as the surrounding mythos behind them. Yes, God of War may have been the first to do it successfully, but to me, Immortal Fenyx Rising could have become something special. Sadly, we'll never know, so we'll just have to be content with the idea of the gods up on Olympus, fighting and arguing and hoping that when things reach a boiling point, Fenyx is there to rein them all back in. I want to thank those of you who stayed and watched this entire video. I know it was a long one, but I really do appreciate it. I'm going to do my best to hop on my Ghostwire Tokyo video next and try to have that done by Halloween time. Though with the upcoming release of Borderlands 4, there's a possibility I might get sidetracked. I'm not 100% sure. While you wait, feel free to check out my other videos, leave a comment, and if you want, like and subscribe to my channel. Bye!